What happens when a royal child, born to inherit the supposedly perfect bloodline of God, comes with a defect? The answer is not written in any history book you will ever read. Because according to official records, that child never existed. They were killed while still breathing. This is the darkest secret, more closely guarded than any treasure in the palace vaults. Behind the gilded walls and velvet curtains where royal families project an image of godlike perfection to their subjects, a horrifying truth lies buried. For more than a millennium, while they preached divine blood and divine authority, they silently erased the most vulnerable members of history itself. Children born with Down syndrome or any visible disability were not simply hidden. They were locked away in remote monasteries or anonymous mental institutions, forgotten by the very families who were supposed to protect them. Why? The answer lies not in simple cruelty, but in a systemic fear, a cold logic that sustains the monarchy's power. The birth of an imperfect child is more than a blemish on the family's reputation. It threatens the very foundations of monarchical authority. How could a bloodline that is supposedly superior, chosen by God, produce a defective being? It is a dangerous question, a contradiction that can shake the very faith of an entire kingdom. These children then become inconvenient truths. And in a world where appearances are everything, their removal from the public eye becomes a cruel necessity for those who value the crown over compassion. Imagine a medieval castle. A newborn baby cries, but instead of joy, the air is filled with silence and fear. The midwife shakes her head. The court priest makes a hasty sign of the cross. The child, a prince or princess, is immediately wrapped in the finest silk, but not to be presented to the court. He is whisked away in the night to a remote abbey, where his name will be forgotten and his royal title will be meaningless. The Catholic Church, with its influence over Europe, has unwittingly provided a merciful solution. Monasteries and convents become places to house royal children deemed unfit for public life. But is this mercy? Or is it just another form of imprisonment? A prison where these children live in absolute isolation, deprived of the love of their families and never knowing the world beyond the cold stone walls. As the centuries passed, from the dark Middle Ages to the glorious Renaissance to the Age of Enlightenment, the methods of concealment became more and more sophisticated. Royal physicians were complicit in forging death certificates. Court records were altered. Family trees were redrawn. Children who should have been princes and princesses became anonymous residents of remote institutions, their royal blood meaningless in the face of the defects they bore. We are about to enter the darkest corners of royal history, where the story is not of heroic legends, but of systematically orchestrated silences. The story of forgotten souls. And the haunting question remains, does the blue blood really carry a curse, not a curse of disease, but a curse of perfection at all costs? Paradoxically, the Age of Enlightenment, which celebrated reason and human dignity, did not bring liberation. On the contrary, it tightened the invisible shackles around these outcasts. The light of knowledge, instead of illuminating the dark corners, made the shadows longer and deeper. Why did an age that produced great philosophers of human rights become fertile ground for one of the most brutal forms of cover-up? The answer lies in the emergence of a new force, the public. Before that, royal life had been largely private. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, as literacy rates skyrocketed and the first newspapers were invented, every royal activity was put under a microscope. Every marriage, every public appearance, every birth announcement carried political weight. Monarchs were no longer just rulers. They had become national icons, the world's first celebrities. In this unprecedented environment of scrutiny, the pressure to maintain a perfect family image multiplied. A disabled child was no longer a source of family shame. It was a potential scandal that could be printed and distributed throughout the kingdom. It was a threat to the national interest. Imagine a European context in which a fierce competition for global dominance was taking place. The existence of a disabled prince or princess could undermine marriage negotiations, a key tool for cementing alliances. Enemies could use it as evidence of a corrupted bloodline, a sign that the dynasty was in decline. So concealment became more than just an act of protecting religious beliefs. It became a cold political calculation. The scientific revolution that swept Europe during this period brought both hope and horror. Medicine began to gain a rudimentary understanding of genetic conditions, but that early and biased knowledge was often used to justify segregation and institutionalization. Doctors, armed with scientific authority, often advised royal families to immediately remove disabled children. They argued that it was better for everyone, a cunning argument that relieved the family of its burden while maintaining the appearance of humanity. And so a new industry was born, the industry of forgetting. Private institutions began to spring up across Europe, many of them specifically designed to house the inconvenient relatives of wealthy families. These facilities, often located in remote areas far from major cities, provided the perfect solution for royal families who wanted to make their disabled children disappear without having to literally kill them. A child could be sent there, along with a generous stipend to ensure their eternal silence. The family would maintain the false story that the child had died in infancy. Meanwhile, the child, a royal by blood, would live out the rest of their lives as a shadow, their name erased from the family tree and their existence known only to administrators paid to forget. Science, instead of freeing these children, has forged a new cage for them, a gilded cage of medical deception. And the worst nightmare of all, cloaked in the cloak of progress and reason, is only just beginning. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a photo of a hidden royal child could topple a throne. By the turn of the 20th century, the advent of mass photography and an increasingly aggressive press presented royal families with a dilemma. It was harder than ever to hide a family member. But at the same time, a new, cold, and dangerous ideology arose to provide them with the perfect moral cover for their most heinous acts. It was called eugenics. Eugenics, the pseudoscience that believed human populations could be improved through selective breeding, found enthusiastic adherents among the European aristocracy. To minds already obsessed with the purity of blood, it was a doctrine that held deadly allure. It presented disability not as a personal tragedy, but as a social danger, a pollution that could weaken an entire bloodline and, by extension, a nation. It transformed shame into a duty. The removal of the disabled from society was no longer a selfish act of prestige. It was cloaked in the cloak of moral duty, of protecting the future of the species. With this scientific justification, the early decades of the 20th century saw an unprecedented collaboration between royal families, medical professionals, and asylum administrators to systematically eradicate disabled royal children. The process became a well-oiled machine. A child was removed shortly after birth. Death certificates were forged with increasing sophistication, with medical details plausibly fabricated. Psychiatric asylums developed specialized procedures to house royal prisoners, while maintaining absolute secrecy about their identities. They were living ghosts in a system designed to deny their very existence. And then came the First World War. The chaos of war, the shuffling of records, the displacement of populations, and the collapse of traditional power structures created the perfect smokescreen to cover the transfer of these children to institutions. Many of the children who entered these institutions during the war years would never be heard from again. Their fates were lost in the larger tragedy of the conflict, their silent deaths an anonymous drop in the ocean of European mourning. Amidst this backdrop, one particular story offers a window into how even loving royal families can fail to protect their children under the weight of societal expectations. In 1915, as Europe was in flames, Princess Alexandra of Prussia was born. She was the daughter of Prince August Wilhelm, the fourth son of Emperor Wilhelm II, and Princess Alexandra Victoria. From birth, Alexandra showed clear signs of Down syndrome. Unlike many royal families who would have immediately institutionalized such a child, her parents initially chose to keep her at home. But in a world obsessed with perfection and a Germany plunging into war, Was her family's love enough to protect her from a system designed to eradicate people like her? Or did that love ultimately become the walls of a prison that would keep her locked up for life? Princess Alexandra's story is not a tragedy of estrangement, but a more subtle tragedy, that of imprisoned love. Her father, Prince August Wilhelm, the son of an emperor obsessed with military precision and imperial grandeur, understood better than anyone the pressure to maintain a perfect image. His father's court was no place for a child who could not perform ceremonial duties. Yet despite this environment, August Wilhelm and his wife, Princess Alexandra Victoria, managed to create a loving oasis for their young daughter. Alexandra's early years were spent in the family's private apartments. She was educated and cared for by carefully selected staff who were sworn to absolute secrecy about her condition. But this love came with a cruel condition: invisibility. Court photographers were instructed to exclude her from family portraits. Official biographies of the Hohenzollerns made no mention of her existence. She became a ghost in her own home, present but unseen, loved but hidden. Imagine her life. She could hear her brother, Alexander Ferdinand, laughing in the great halls. She could see her family dressed for state events through the cracks in the door. But she was never included. She was excluded from the very heart of royal life, the world to which she was supposed to belong. As she grew older, the contrast between her fate and her brother's became increasingly stark. Her brother went to university, took on public roles, and lived a full life. She, by some genetic quirk, was confined to her chambers, her fate decided by a system that valued appearance over humanity. The most devastating twist in her story came in 1918. The collapse of the German monarchy should have been a relief for Alexandra. Without her royal duties, the pressure to hide her should have disappeared. Instead, it created new dangers. The political chaos that followed Germany's defeat left all members of the former royal family vulnerable. Fear for Alexandra's safety, combined with decades of habituation to secrecy, led her family to maintain her hidden status even after her public duties ended. Her prison, once a prison of social expectations, became a prison of political fear. Alexandra lived her entire life within the walls of her family mansion. She died in 1980 at the age of 65, after more than 6 decades as a secret member of one of Europe's most famous families. Her death was not made public, and her burial was private, attended only by her closest family members. Alexandra's tragedy was that she was imprisoned by love. But in another kingdom, across the English Channel, 2 other royal children were about to face an even more terrible fate. A fate without love, without presence, only oblivion, officially sealed by the crown. Their story would expose the system at its deepest cruelty. In England, a land of rigid ritual and tradition, cruelty does not need war to cover it up. It hides in plain sight, inside a red leather-bound book. The story of Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon is not a tragedy of simple cover-up. It is an indictment of deliberate erasure, a cold, calculated act carried out by those closest to the English throne. Nerissa was born in 1919 and Catherine in 1926. They were the daughters of John Bowes-Lyon, the brother of Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the woman who would become Queen Elizabeth and known to the world as the Queen Mother. This meant that Nerissa and Catherine were first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II. Their births should have been a cause for celebration, but instead marked the beginning of a life defined by systematic deception. As the Bowes-Lyons rose to prominence through Elizabeth's marriage to King George VI, the pressure to maintain a perfect image became acute. The existence of 2 disabled children in the immediate royal circle was a time bomb that the family was determined to defuse at all costs. And they did the unthinkable. In 1941, when Nerissa was 22 and Catherine was 15, the family committed them to the Royal Oldswood Hospital in Surrey, a Victorian institution for the mentally defective. But that wasn't the worst part. Soon after, the family reported both sisters' deaths to Burke's Peerage, the Bible of British aristocracy, with Nerissa listed as having died in 1961 and Catherine in 1940. They were officially dead, erased from the records of the upper class. while in reality, they were beginning a life sentence of oblivion. Ullswood Royal Hospital is a vast, bleak Victorian complex that houses thousands of outcasts. Imagine the cruel contrast. While her cousin Elizabeth lives in the luxury of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, admired by the world, Nerissa and Catherine live in crowded dormitories, with minimal privacy and limited care. They are treated like ordinary patients, with no one in the hospital knowing of their royal connections. They have become living ghosts, existing in a limbo between life and death in the eyes of their own families. The deception continued for more than 40 years. Silence reigned. Even within the extended family, many believed the sisters had died in infancy. The truth only began to emerge in the 1980s, when investigative journalists uncovered discrepancies in royal records. The scandal exploded, forcing the monarchy to confront its treatment of its most vulnerable members. Nerissa died in hospital in 1986, aged 66, still officially recorded as having died in 1961. Her original grave was marked only by a plastic tag with a series of numbers. Catherine survived until 2014, dying at the age of 87 after 73 years in captivity. She had outlived most of those who had decided to erase her. This betrayal did not come from just one family. It required the complicity of an entire system. So who helped them? Who kept this secret for more than 4 decades? And why? Even as the truth was revealed, was there still an ominous silence from the palace? The answer to that eerie silence lies not in an individual, but in an ideology that has poisoned the European elite. An ideology that dresses itself in the cloak of science and bears a seductive and deadly name: eugenics. To understand why Nerissa and Catherine were so brutally wiped out, we must understand the sick logic that allowed such an act not only to happen, but to be deemed necessary. Eugenics was not a fringe doctrine in the early 20th century. It was taught in prestigious universities and advocated by politicians, scientists, and leading thinkers. It divided society into 2 groups: the fit and the unfit. The unfit, which included the developmentally disabled, the mentally ill, and even the poor, were seen as a burden on the state and a threat to the nation's genetic health. They were bad blood that needed to be controlled and prevented from spreading. For the nobility and the royal family, whose entire identity was built on the notion of a superior bloodline, eugenics provided the perfect justification. It transformed personal shame into a social mission. Hiding a disabled child was no longer about protecting the family's reputation. In the warped thinking of the times, it was a responsible act, a eugenic duty to purify the bloodline, to ensure that the lineage was not polluted. The decision to institutionalize Nerissa and Catherine and kill them could thus be justified as an act of extreme patriotism, a sacrifice for the purity of British blood. This mindset has permeated the Western world, from forced sterilization programs in the United States and Scandinavia to its most horrific climax, the Nazi T4 program, where hundreds of thousands of disabled people were systematically murdered. The Bose-Lyon sisters' story is not an anomaly. It is a manifestation, albeit a less physically violent one, of the same ideology that sees some human lives as worthless. And this ideology created an infrastructure of complicity, which answers the question: who helped them? First, there was the medical profession. Doctors, trained in a cult of eugenics, provided scientific diagnoses and recommendations to legitimize incarceration. They turned a family decision into a medical order. Second, there was the legal system. Lawyers discreetly set up trusts and financial arrangements to finance lifelong incarceration, while ensuring the silence and ability of families to escape liability. And finally, there were the administrators of mental asylums. Those who ran facilities like the Royal Ullswood made keeping the secrets of the elite their business model. They were paid to provide incarceration and oblivion, bound by confidentiality agreements and financial gain. The whole system has worked to dehumanize its victims. Nerissa and Catherine are no longer nieces or cousins. They have become cases to be managed, problems to be solved. But is cruelty the only way? What happens when a leader a man of steel and principle, is faced with the same choice. Can love triumph over the system? Or does it simply create another form of prison, one built of love and silence? Not every story about hidden children is a story of abandonment. Some are more complex tragedies, stories of deep love struggling within a prison of social expectations. That is the story of de Gaulle, and born in 1928, was the youngest daughter of Charles de Gaulle, who would become president of France and one of the most influential political figures of the 20th century. She was born with Down syndrome, a fact that was immediately apparent to her family, but hidden from the French public throughout her father's illustrious career. But here the story takes a different turn. Charles and his wife, Yvonne, made an extraordinary decision at the time. They would keep Anne at home. No asylum, no death certificate, no disownment. De Gaulle's love for Anne was legendary in his private circle. The stern-looking general, who had led France through its darkest hours, was unusually tender with his youngest daughter. He called her ma joie, my joy. It is said that he would sing to her, play simple games with her on the floor, and that her presence was the only balm that could melt his stony visage, and was included in family activities, loved by her siblings, and experienced a warm family bond that countless other disabled royal children were denied. But herein lies the tragic paradox of the story. That profound love was accompanied by a total concealment. As Charles de Gaulle's political career advanced, especially his role as leader of the French resistance during World War II, the family became increasingly concerned about the political implications of public knowledge of Anne's condition. In an age when eugenics was still in vogue, having a disabled child could be used by political opponents to question de Gaulle's fitness to lead the country. An elaborate system of concealment was thus set up and was completely excluded from official family photographs. De Gaulle biographies never mention her name. When the family appeared in public and remained at home with her carers, she became an invisible member of one of France's most visible families. She was loved in her private world, but denied in her own family's public world. The psychological cost was enormous. For de Gaulle, a champion of French dignity, the decision to hide his daughter must have created a terrible inner conflict. And for Anne, as she grew up and became aware of her family's status, the knowledge that her existence was considered so shameful that she had to be covered up must have left emotional wounds that no amount of love could ever fully heal. And died of pneumonia in 1948 at the age of 20 in her father's arms. Her death, like her life, was kept private. After burying her daughter, de Gaulle is said to have said, in a rare moment of weakness, to a close confidant, "Maintenant, elle est comme les autres." Now she is like the others. That phrase encapsulated the entire tragedy. Only death could free his daughter from a difference that society did not accept, even in the eyes of a father who loved her unconditionally. And story shows that even boundless love cannot break down the walls of prejudice. It can only create a safe space, but a confining one nonetheless. So what is the ultimate legacy of these hidden children? What can we learn from the stolen lives, the staged tragedies, and the silent tears of the world's most powerful parents? Their legacy is not unmarked graves or erased family tree entries. Their legacy is a mirror, a cold, unforgiving mirror that forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. This cruelty is not an aberration of history, but the logical product of systems that prize appearance over humanity, convenience over compassion. The children we have spoken of, Alexandrine, Nerissa, Catherine, and countless others who have been swallowed up by history, were not victims of spontaneous acts of cruelty. They were victims of calculated decisions made by educated and powerful men who chose the crown over humanity. They were the products of an inhumane machine called social expectation, a machine run by complicit doctors, secretive lawyers, and a network of institutions paid to provide oblivion. The price was not just stolen lives, but the poison of secrecy and guilt that has poisoned royal families for generations. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that these practices continued, even reached their peak in the 20th century, an era when medical knowledge was supposed to bring empathy and social progress was supposed to ensure dignity for all. That disabled royal children were hidden and ostracized in the same decades that produced the Bill of Rights and the Civil Rights Movement shows how deeply entrenched prejudice can be, transcending even the greatest political and social changes. And today, as we look back on these stories with horror, we must ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Have we really changed? We may be proud of our progress in disability rights, but have we truly eliminated the underlying biases that allowed this systemic cruelty to occur? Do we still measure human worth based on perceived perfection? In an era of prenatal genetic testing and the pursuit of a flawless society, are we reproducing, in a more subtle form, the same desire to eliminate what is considered imperfect? Ultimately, the shift in attitudes towards people with disabilities in recent decades offers hope that the hidden suffering of the royal children was not entirely in vain. Their hidden lives and silent deaths became part of a larger narrative of human dignity, one that ultimately led to legal protection, social inclusion, and full recognition of the humanity of all people, regardless of their differences. But we must remember that this progress is neither self-evident nor complete. The forgotten princes and princesses we have discovered today deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes in royal history, but as whole human beings whose lives had value far beyond their ability to meet societal expectations or family ambitions. Their legacy must be our commitment to ensuring that no child, royal or commoner, will suffer the same fate of being loved in secret while being erased from public view. Their memory demands that we re-examine our own hearts and our societies for the prejudices that continue to devalue human life. Their stories compel us to choose courage over convenience, truth over appearances, and love over fear.